Hey guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and today we're gonna talk about the Necrons. They are one of the oldest codexes in 9th edition, but they've received some incredible buffs in the recent updates, so now we'll discuss how to use them competitively in games, and without further ado, let's dive right in. And to better understand how to use this army on the board, we need to know what are its strengths. While not the toughest army in the game per se, Necrons can surprise you with their resilience, and it's actually one of the things that I really like about them. It's very hard to gauge how tough they are before you actually start trying to kill them. It's because of the layered defense. They have overall high toughness, they have reanimation protocols that allow models to come back to life if the squad wasn't wiped completely. All models in the army that have more than one wound regain a wound in each of the command phases. So if your vehicle is damaged, it will regain a single wound. It may sound like not that much, but in terms of a whole game and when your whole army does that, it actually starts to add up. You can use command protocols. It's an army-wide rule that is basically tied. Each command protocol is tied to one of the turns of the game, and you select that before the game, and you also have a single protocol that is active during the whole game in addition to all the ones that are being activated at the start of each of the battle rounds. And some of the command protocols are defensive. For example, the command protocol called Undying Legions allows you to either regain 2 wounds thanks to the Living Metal ability, or reroll a single dice roll each time you roll for reanimation protocols. And for those of you who don't know, reanimation protocols, it's basically the rule that allows you when, for example, in a unit of 3 Scorpack destroyers, 2 of them died, and you add up the wounds characteristic of both the models that died, so we'll have 6, and you roll the 6 dice, and each 5+ that you roll goes to the pool. And if you have enough dice in that pool to reanimate a single model, and enough means that the number of dice equals to the number of wounds in the single model in the unit, you can reanimate that model and bring it back to life with full wounds remaining. So the Undying Legions command protocol allows you to reroll one of the dice, and sometimes it's crucial. For example, if you rolled 6 dice and you have 2 5s and any other dice that's not a 5, you can reroll that and have a good chance of actually rolling the 5 or 6 and restoring another model back. You can also resurrect models thanks to the Technomancers, who are just like the apothecaries in the Space Marine chapters, and you can do that to even some expensive models. So the question is not if you can kill Necrons, it's how fast can you kill them, because they will be doing damage to you constantly and they will be resurrecting, and the more the game goes on, the harder it is to actually get rid of them. They are a universal army. It means that they do well both in combat and in shooting, depending on how you build your list, obviously, but usually I recommend to build a balanced force, and that's, I think, where the Necrons feel most comfortable. They may not have those one-punch-man units that can delete anything in the game in one go. They probably don't have anything like that at all, but they have some dangerous stuff that will get through the enemy if it has enough time, and the time is all the Necrons have because of their survivability. And thanks to multiple rounds of points updates, you can actually get quite a lot of units in your force for those 2000 points. Though Necrons can be considered a fairly elite army, 2000 points of Necrons on the table look quite substantial. You can say thanks to them being an underdog army for almost a year and a half already, and that's why the Games Workshop were trying to decrease the prices around after round after round, trying to find that perfect balance where the Necrons will be able to perform. Necrons have Cetans, which are a very interesting type of unit. They are characters, but they can be targeted even though they have 9 wounds, and not everyone is as cool as Abaddon. And they have the same rule that allows them not to suffer any more than 3 wounds in a given phase. It allows you to use them very tactically, and if you do try to hide them as much as possible and only bring them out in the opportune moment, you will actually be happy with the result. In my opinion, especially after the discounts, the Nightbringer is the best Cetan there is, because he ignores both the Filnal Paints or any rules that allow models to ignore wounds, so Abaddon's, for example, rule, or the Cetan's rule itself, and also ignores invulnerable saves. So he's like your tactical nuke that you can use to absolutely destroy something if you roll well, because Cetans don't have rerolls innately, but you have a good potential of destroying something very valuable, and your opponent will have little to defend their models with. They aren't that CP hungry, even though they have great stratagems, but they are not tied to using them. They can work perfectly well without them. And same goes for the relics. They have a couple of relics that you may think to take, probably a single relic that you will take in each and every game, and that's it. You don't really need to spend any more command points on that. And that's great, because you will be able to use the command points for the actual important stuff that's generic to each and every army, like counteroffensive stratagem, like command point rerolls in the right moments, and etc. They have wonderful, easy to score secondaries, especially now when you can actually bring multiples of the chapter or army specific secondaries to the game, and especially with the OBSEC dynasty, which is the one that I recommend to use, because there are some nice dynasties like Novak, which is a melee one, like Zarakan, which is the Silent Kings one, more universal, that allows you to ignore mortal wounds and reroll a single wound roll when you are shooting. But all those are, I think, less efficient than the good old 6-inch pregame move and OBSEC on your whole army. Now let's talk about weaknesses. Not present in the psychic phase. They don't do anything in the psychic phase. They have 2 deny options in the entire book, and all of them are not that great. You need to have either the Silent King to have a single deny, or the Canoptic Spider with the Gloom Prism. Again, not something that you will necessarily have in your list, so in most cases you will be just standing and silently nodding to your opponent in the psychic phase. They are pretty slow, and they have almost no charge modification ability. So Novak have +1 to the charges, that's the main one, and other than that you will be forced to roll that 9 if you have come from Deep Strike. They have some fast units like Scarabs, like Wraith, but you need to actually put them in your list to have that tactical efficiency and the ability to move across the board pretty fast. They have a lot of command phase buffs, important buffs. The main one, for example, is the Chronomancer's 5-up-1 that he can put on a unit of this Scorpic Destroyers, for example, and you cannot actually use that buff until your command phase comes. So if your opponent goes first, you need to hide your Scorpic Destroyers in order to preserve them from being shot and utterly annihilated. A lot of characters are very much underpowered, like for example Overlord only has 4 attacks, which is absolutely idiotic, and also they were overcosted, but now with the new points updates they feel generally okay. If you've seen some of my videos, you know that I usually recommend to build a balanced force, and it's for a good reason. That's how you get consistent results in games against various opponents, especially in tournament conditions where you might encounter an army that's very heavy in melee and you would need to rely more on your shooting, and vice versa. Plus with Necrons you don't really get much leeway in terms of your ability to actually do something to your opponent. You don't have the psychic phase at your disposal, so you will have to do with the shooting and melee. It would be strange to skip on some of that. So let's figure out first the main body of the army, what's going to do majority of the saving throws and damage in melee. My choice for that would be Lich Guard, because they are tough, they're good in melee, and I would probably bring 1 or 2 units of 10. Thanks to them having only 2 wounds, they work pretty well with the reanimation protocols, because you don't need to roll too many 5s to actually revive a single model or more. And they have a 4-up invulnerable and 2-up save, so if they are in cover, they are pretty hard to shift, especially considering that they have toughness 5. And they are not that great in melee, but they do have 3 attacks each at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 1, which means that they will chip through stuff if you give them enough time. They're not actually there to do vast amounts of damage. They can deal with some stuff, but they will not bring a knight down in one go. Next are the Scorpic Destroyers. These guys are more geared towards doing damage, but are less resilient than the Lich Guard, so you have to use them in a slightly different way and actually give them the 5-up invulnerable from the Chronomancer to increase their survivability. I usually bring a full squad of 6 with the Parasite, because what I've learned in my games is that those extra attack and strength from the Parasite, it it's where the actual strength of this unit is, and if you don't bring him and don't apply that buff, they usually underperform and don't do enough damage to actually be worth the investment. The thing I really like about Scorpix is their 8-inch move. They are much faster than most of the units that you have at your disposal, and it means that you will be able to reach stuff that your opponent might not have expected you to reach. And as they are a core unit, they will also be affected by the Relentless March aura from your Lord and Overlord, and it means that they will get the 9-inch move instead of an 8-inch one. Now let's talk firepower. We have our Doomsday Arcs and Destroyers, both varieties, the heavy one and the regular one. The general rule is Doomsday Arc is much more survivable but does less damage than the Heavy Destroyers, and the Heavy Destroyers are again less survivable but do more damage. The regular Destroyers, they do a different type of damage. They are more like anti-heavy infantry elite targets, not something like knights or tanks, and I think that you are better off going for the Heavy Destroyers and the Doomsday Arc, because that's where Necrons have a problem. They have a problem with dealing with big, nasty things with saves and a lot of wounds. You actually have another option, it's a Triax Stalker. It's a walker with quite a lot of wounds, an invulnerable save, transhuman, so it can be wounded on better than force, a multi-melter that can be shot as a heavy flamer, dual heavy flamer instead, some close combat attacks. So with the current price of the Triax Stalker, I think it's a nice support option as well, in addition to our Destroyers or Doomsday Arcs, not instead of. As a Joker element, again, I recommend to add a Nightbringer, because for his 320 points, he will do a lot of work, either or do nothing but really bother your opponent for the entirety of the game, or until he actually goes down. I also really like Flayed ones. They don't cost a lot, and they actually can do some damage in combat. They can deep strike innately. They are pretty survivable, especially if you use the stratagem to make them -1 to hit, and especially if you use them in Novak, because you will be able to roll that 8 out of deep strike, not a 9. I would also highly recommend to add speed to your roster and have a unit or two of 3 Tomb Blades. They are cheap as dirt and very, very fast. It's one of the most efficient ways to score objectives and some secondaries that you have. Moving on to the big guys, we have two nice options here. Obviously the Silent King, he's one of the best units in the whole book. He does amazing stuff to your army, provides rerolls for himself, provides rerolls for all the core units in shooting and melee, so he is awesome for his 400 points. Probably the biggest thing I love about him is that he can fly, and he is also less than 18 wounds, so he can actually use obscuring and be hidden. And next one is, a monolith. Hear me out, they are not that bad anymore. Yes, they are far less efficient than the Silent King, but honestly, there are some rosters where I think a monolith would not be a bad choice. Yeah, may not be the best one competitively speaking, but your opponent will be so terrified that you've brought the monolith, they will think that you have some deadly strategy in mind, that they are doomed already, and this alone will win you the game, I think. And if the points allow, I recommend to get a unit or two of Scarabs. They don't cost quite a lot, they cost only 45 points for 3 bases of 4 wounds each, so 12 wounds for 45 points, extremely points efficient, and that can ruin a day for a happy smiter like Thousand Sons, the Grey Knights, or Tyranids, stuff like that. In terms of troops, you either build around warriors and take enough chronomancers for the 5-up invulnerable saves and take technomancers to revive those warriors, probably take the Ghost Arc to revive even more of those warriors, or just take several units of immortals because they are cheaper and they are pretty great for the purposes of this army. If you want to have a battalion, which is not something that you need to have considering how CP efficient the Necrons are, you can go for the Vanguard detachment in this case, even though it's something that I do not recommend for almost all other factions in the game currently in Nephilim. So if you need the battalion, go for the Immortals or build around warriors. For HQs, I recommend to bring either an Overlord or a named Overlord like Anrakyr the Traveler, who gives an aura of +1 attacks, which is incredible. If you bring a generic Overlord, always bring them with an orb, a resurrection orb. It's an a paid war gear upgrade that allows you to enact the resurrection protocols on one of your units that were depleted during the game, and you can roll the reanimations for all the dead models just one time again, and this way you use up that resurrection orb and restore some of your models depending on how lucky you were on the roll. Chronomancers and Technomancers are also awesome, so I recommend to have at least one Chronomancer to defend your Scorpion destroyers, and if you have more units that desperately need that 5-up invulnerable save, bring more of them if you can. Technomancers are also great, especially if you have a Sound King. He's a must-have to restore, resurrect those menhirs, and if you have warriors, again, he's great. If you want to resurrect Scorpion destroyers, he's great, so another great character to have if you can invest in him. Now let's talk about special characters. First of all, the Sound King. His description, as you can see, is very substantial. He'll be your one Necron model to rule them all. He buffs the army like crazy. He has an aura of reroll all hits within 6 for ranged weapons for core unit and Triac Praetorians unit, and he is core for some reason. So he rerolls all hits for ranged attacks. He also rerolls all wounds in melee, as do all the core units and Triac units within 6 of him. Obviously he has Relentless March and double My Will Be Done. My Will Be Done is just a +1 to hit buff that any lord can apply to any core unit within 9 inches of them. He also gives you ability to assign a single command protocol to 2 rounds instead of 1, so if you want, for example, to have an extra move characteristic on all your models that have the command protocols ability, you can do that with him for 2 rounds instead of 1. He's pretty hard to kill, especially if you consider that he can be hidden behind the wall, and that's the best defense that you can have. He has 16 wounds himself, and also 2 menhirs that each have 5 wounds, so 26 wounds for this guy. He does degrade quite a lot, but he has living metal, and you can restore those menhirs with the Technomancer's help, so oh no, he's definitely not that easy to kill. He makes every enemy unit within engagement range fight last, so it's not, again, easy to just charge and deal a whole bunch of wounds to him. You will have to first soak up some damage from him and from other units that are within engagement range of you. He fights pretty well, 6 attacks at strength 9 AP 3 damage 2, plus 4 attacks at strength 8 AP 4 damage 3, and also 3 attacks strength 5 AP 2 damage 1. Versatile shooting, 2 shots strength 10 AP 4 damage 6 from those menhirs, 9 shots strength 6 AP 2 damage 1, and 3 shots strength 8 AP 3 damage 2. So it's not like you cannot use Necrons without him. I just think that he's very efficient, and probably if you're trying to build the most powerful Necron list out there, he may be the model that you should go for first. Illuminor Xerath. He's the best Technomancer in town. He resurrects twice in 2 different units. Obviously you cannot resurrect multiple times in a single unit. He can give a random buff to a single unit each movement phase, so +1 ballistic skill, +1 strength, or +1 toughness, depending on what you roll on the D3. And each time he destroys a unit in the fight phase, which I do not recommend for you to send him out to fight. He's not there for that purpose. But if he does, he can again buff some unit with his special ability. He gives Psykers a big headache if they are within 12 inches of him and roll doubles on their casts. A very specialized rule which will probably not ever come into play, but he has that. He is an okay fighter. He has 4 attack strength 6 AP 4 damage 2 and 2 attack strength 6 AP 2 damage 1. So probably he can kill a half depleted squad of intercessors for some reason if you really want him to fight. He also has a Melta Lance with D3 shot strength 8 AP 4 damage D6 that can shoot up to 36 inches, which is probably more interesting for us because it keeps him safe but actually allows him to do something for the army. And he costs 145 points, which is not bad, but I cannot say that he is a must-have for Necrons. And next is Anrakyr the Traveler. He is basically there for one reason. He has an aura of +1 attack for core units within 6. It's awesome. It's +1 attack for your Lich Guard, so they make 4 attacks base or 5 attacks each if you use a stratagem on them. It buffs the Scorpion destroyers, it buffs everything. So incredible aura, and you definitely want to have this guy in your army unless you already have an Overlord. you really want to bring a resurrection orb, which is understandable. He costs 130 points, which is okay for what he does for the army. In terms of secondaries, there are 3 that we should look at. First of all, the Purge the Vermin from the Battlefield Supremacy category. It was nerfed before you got 2 victory points for each table quarter that does not have enemy units at the end of your turn. Now you get only 1 point, but you also score a point if there are no enemy units within your deployment zone. So they have not nerfed it as hard as they did with the Drukhari's Herd the Prey. You'll probably be using this secondary in each and every game because it's just very easy to score, and you will get at least some points for it. And if you're lucky, you can actually get quite a lot, especially if you pay attention and try to clear your opponent's chaff units from the quarters fast enough. Because nowadays people like to bunch up in the middle of the board or in some one quarter, and the other quarters are usually held by some little units that are pretty relatively easy to get rid of sometimes. Next is the Shadow Operations Ancient Machineries. I really like this one, especially if you follow my advice and have a unit or 2 of Tomb Blades in your army and actually bring the OPSEC dynasty along. You basically need to do an action on any objective that is not within your deployment zone, and each time you do that with the objective secured models. And it's very important, because if you don't have objective secured, the action is completed at the start of your next command phase, which is not what we want, because it's possible to destroy the unit that is performing the action. If you have OPSEC, you actually complete the action at the end of your turn and get 4 points each time a unit from your army does that. It's incredible, because you can get 8 points, which is the overall minimum that you should be getting from each of your secondaries in order to aim for the victory. You can get that just by activating or awakening the 2 objectives that are closest to your deployment zone. And if you are lucky enough or fast enough to reach one of the objectives that are closer to your opponent, or the one in the middle of the board, depending on the deployment, you will actually have 12 victory points, which is incredible. The only drawback is that you actually need to control the objective in order to start the action, so it will not work if your opponent is standing there with some OPSEC models. But if they don't have OPSEC, you are controlling that objective, and it means that you can start the action. The No Mercy, No Respite Treasures of Aeons is also a nice one. Your opponent selects 3 objective markers on the battlefield, and they probably will select the furthest from you, but they cannot start with the objective markers in their deployment zone, so probably those will be the objective markers in no man's land. And at the end of your turn, you score victory points if you control 1 or more of the selected objective markers. One objective marker costs 2 victory points, 2 objective markers 3, and 3 objective markers 5. So again, not a bad one. Even if your opponent selects the worst, you will probably be able to score at least 1 or 2 maybe, and scoring 2 or 3 victory points a turn is pretty nice, and you probably don't have anything better in the No Mercy, No Respite category, because No Prisoners is very situational and grind them down is pretty much bad. Now let's talk about the synergies. I'll start with the Chronomancer. I love giving him the Hyper Material Ablator for 20 points, or the Contemporal Nanomies for 25. These are the upgrades that you can buy for your Chronomancers, Technomancers. The first one gives light cover to your core Canoptic unit within 9 inches if it gets shot from further than 12. It's a nice way to protect your Monolith or Lich Guard from shooting. And the second one halves advance and charge rolls for 1 enemy unit that you selected in the shooting phase that is within 18 inches of the bearer of this upgrade. As I already said, I recommend to run a big unit of Scorpack. I recommend a unit of 6 with the Plasma Sight. You'd get better efficiency from the 1 command point Whirling Onslaught. It's a -1 to wounds. It works both in combat and in shooting. You can activate it in any of these phases. And you also get better efficiency from the 1 command point Disruption Fields, which is a flat +1 strength to all of your attacks. It also stacks with the Parasites +1 strength, so you will actually get strength 9 on your heavy attacks on the Reap Blades. Don't forget about the 1 command point Blood Rites for your Novok. If you run them, it's a +1 attack stratagem, which is incredible, obviously, for your Lich Guard, your Scorpacks, anything that needs to kill as much as possible in melee. It's awesome to have +1 attack. For Lich Guard, they are bodyguards, so keep them close to your nobles. You'll be rewarded with 1 command point Eternal Protectors. It's that stratagem that I've mentioned previously, +1 attack if the unit is within 3 inches of a noble in melee. In terms of protocols, I recommend to choose Undying Legions again as your permanent one, and probably start with the Eternal Guardian. It's the one that gives you army light cover if it did not move in this battle round. If you want to surprise your opponent, put a unit of Scorpack in a Knight Scythe and into strategic reserves. In the second turn, you can set your flyer up within 6 inches of the table edge and then disembark the destroyers using the 1 command point Prismatic Dimensional Breach within 3 inches of the Knight Scythe. And you will be able to get a 6-inch charge out of Deep Strike this way. It's a very nice combo, and I've been on the receiving end of this one, and to be honest, I was caught off guard. If you run Flayed Ones, 1 command point Shadows of Drajak is a lifesaver. You get -1 to hit on a big squad of 20, and it's incredible, especially considering how difficult it is to kill 1 moon models with the reanimation protocols. The Technorecal Targeting is the 1 command point strat that can help you in a pinch, especially when you need to wound a transhuman target, for example, with a very important shot. You just spend the command point and wound automatically with 1 attack. Very nice. For the Lockhouse Destroyers, they have a 2 command point strat to reroll all wound rolls. The Extermination Protocols, it used to be the one and only stratagem that you used in each and every game with Necrons in 8th edition, when it was 1 command point and you got full rerolls to hit and wound on your unit of destroyers. Now it's much weaker, but if you're running a full unit of 6 regular destroyers, it probably is worth it. Don't use it on a unit of 3 heavy destroyers, it's just a waste of 2 command points. And 1 command point Solar Pulse is a nice versatility stratagem that allows you to ignore cover, both dense and light, on a given enemy unit. My favorite build for the Catacomb Command Barge is an Enduring Will Warlord trait and a Voltaic Staff Relic. The first one gives the barge -1 damage, and the second one is just a nice relic that allows you to do more damage in both shooting and combat. And in shooting, you get the Tesla Exploding Sixes do 3 hits instead of 1. And of course, don't forget about the 1 command point Quantum Deflection, which allows you to get the 4-up-and-1 on your quantum shielding models like your Ghost Ark, like your Triax Stalker, and etc. Now the relics. Your good old Veil of Darkness, it's a redeploy relic. It allows you to redeploy a core unit and the bearer and set them up within 9 inches of the enemy and 6 inches of each other. It's absolutely essential, especially for such a slow army like Necrons. Sometimes you desperately need to be on the other side of the board, for example, or to get out of combat, which is also something, some way you can use this relic to get out of combat without actually falling back. Voltaic Staff, we've already discussed this one. Assault 4, Strength 6, AP2, Damage 2 Tesla weapon, and has +1 strength in melee, so Strength 6, AP2, Damage 2, non-essential, but a great relic anyways. Void Reaper, it's a great war scythe, +2 strength, AP4, Damage 3, ignores all Filmal Pains and any other ignore wounds rules like the Abaddon's or Citan's rule. Again, non-essential, as most weapon relics are. Orb of Eternity. This one is actually essential if you have an Overlord with an orb or a Lord with an orb, it doesn't matter, because it allows you to roll that reanimation roll and actually succeed on the rolls of 4+ instead of 5+, which bumps up the efficiency quite a bit. So for 25 points and a single command point, you can possibly restore like 100 or more points of your army, so it's very much worth it. And Sempiternal Weave, it's a +1 toughness, +1 wound relic for your noble. Pretty mediocre compared to some armor relics in other codexes, but if you really want some character to stay alive for longer, perhaps you would want that, but obviously non-essential. Now let's quickly run through the roster. I have a Vanguard detachment here of obviously the OPSEC and pregame move Dynasty. Anrakyr the Traveler is our Warlord. We have a Chronomancer here with the Entropic Lance, the Veil of Darkness Relic, and the Hypermaterial Ablator. We have the Nightbringer here with the Antimatter Meteor, the Canoptic Plasma Sight, 10 Lich Guard with swords and shields, a unit of Scorpack, unit of 6 obviously, the 2 2 units of Tomb Blades with the particle beamers to make them as cheap as possible. One of them have Shadow Looms just because I didn't have anywhere to put those 10 points anywhere else. And heavy support, we have 2 units of 3 heavy Lockhart destroyers, and as the cherry on top in the super heavy auxiliary detachment, we have the Monolith with 4 death rates. So that's it, guys. I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.